So I work at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I am a manager. I was a biologist. I am a manager. And I will say that the discussion right before lunch brought me back to the beginning of the Caulerpa discussion in California. But before I get to that, give you an overview of my presentation. First, I'm just going to very briefly talk about what we do in California, sort of our key elements of our invasive species program. Then the discussion about our eradication of Caulerpa taxifolia. Most of that information has come from the consulting firm that did the work for us. An overview of a few other species that we are looking at this time with the intention of showing that each species, there's a slightly different strategy and a different management approach, which may or may not include an eradication attempt, and then some of the lessons learned. So in California, we have an aquatic invasive species management plan, and it follows the federal guidelines. So the federal guidelines have these elements as part of a management plan. And I will say research should be on there somewhere, and it is not. But where we spend a lot of my time is on the collaboration and coordination element. The bringing people together, whether it's other state agencies. We have multiple state agencies involved in invasive species. We have our Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have our Department of Food and Agriculture. They are responsible for the noxious weed and other terrestrial programs. Our State Lands Commission, and they are the ones who are responsible for our ballast water program. In addition to that, there's a marine invasive species program in the Department of Fish and Wildlife that works closely with the State Lands Commission. And our State Coastal Conservancy, which does a lot of the funding for projects. So they are more, they would seem maybe more like a foundation. They're able to get money in and get money out when other agencies are not able to. So we work closely with them as well as with our federal partners and stakeholders when we can and when we need to, and also tribal entities. So what we do at our Department of Fish and Wildlife is we chair the committee that is the interagency team. State Lands Commission chairs the committee that is for the ballast water work. So we have a lot of different people working on this. Our main focus certainly is prevention. And the prevention program that we have is limited for the marine environment. It really has to do with our ballast water program, which, at least in the US, is known to be the most progressive ballast water program that currently they're working on additional regulations for the numerical discharge standards of what can and cannot be released in ballast. And Greg knows more about this than I do, so if there are questions, I'm going to have to prevail upon him on that, because I do not work on ballast water. The other prevention program we have that is large is our Department of Food and Agriculture. There are border protection stations for all terrestrial commodities, and as well as for boats that are coming across the country to freshwater areas that might have dreissennid mussels. And we have 18 border stations coming into the state, and they were established really to protect our citrus crop and to protect the rest of our agricultural commodities, but they also are used for a variety of other means. Part of our prevention is also education and outreach, and we talked about that some this morning, and I have a few Caulerpa items that are here that I can show you later. The early detection monitoring, at least for the marine environment, is part of our marine invasive species program. Greg Ruiz works with them closely along our coast, looking at what species are here. We have a good baseline program, and now they're looking at trends. Rapid response is what we like to do. Eradication is what we'd like to do, and control is what sometimes we end up with. So to the Caulerpa. Here's our timeline for Caulerpa. And everybody's very familiar with this by now. And it has to do with this, right? And these items up at the top, the discovery and the book Killer Algae, and then there was an international symposium, really brought awareness to the US. So the awareness came, and then the Department of Agriculture proposed, and then a year later listed Caulerpa taxifolia on the noxious weeds list. And this was really, really critical to our being able to do anything at all. because without that knowledge that came from these elements, we would not have been able to move forward. So here we started out ahead. We started out with some of the research done, the research that we would not be able to do, the knowledge that it really was a problem. And then in 2000, California discovered Caulerpa, and we immediately listed them on what we call our restricted species list. So that took some effort. I have to say that Webiana's not on there, so I'm a little concerned now about that. But we tried to get the whole genus listed. There was a great deal of resistance from the pet industry because they wanted to keep Caulerpa in the trade, and we ended up with a list that I have further on in the talk. After hearing about the Mediterranean issues, these are the three main things that we thought were going to happen in California from that long list of what we all know the impacts are, or it's for. But we have in the one harbor, native eelgrass beds. We're concerned about the loss of biodiversity, closing a harbor so that in a small boat harbor so that people couldn't come back in and out so that we could prevent spread, and then also impacts to commercial fisheries, including an aquaculture facility that is in the one lagoon. So here are the species that we did end up listing, primarily for the Susan Williams, Dr. Susan Williams, really determined what are the ones that might act the same or look alike so that we could have enforcement. So if we have one of our enforcement people go into a pet store and look in an aquarium, which ones look enough alike that they would be able to identify them and seize them. So we ended up with this list. And so illegal to sell, possess, import, transport, transfer, release alive in the state, or to give away. We have found now in the last couple of years that this does not stop the internet trade, and there still is Caulerpa coming into the state. So here are the locations. You've seen them before today. Agua Hedionda Lagoon, that's San Diego County, and Huntington Harbor in the little county of Orange County. And they were both discovered in 2000. We asked ourselves how, Alexander may argue with me, I think, in the question and answer, how were these released? In Agua Hedionda Lagoon, we believe it was through an intentional introduction because there was a large eel found in the lagoon, right where the Caulerpa site was. And so our thought is that the Caulerpa was released when the aquarium was dumped into the lagoon there. In this area, they actually found the aquarium. This is in Huntington Harbor, where they were dumping their water into Huntington Harbor. So here's Agua Hedionda Lagoon. It's relatively small. I don't know how large, but relatively small. This is the interior harbor, and then these are the Caulerpa locations. There's a bridge here. Boats, but for very small boats, don't go in and out. There is a little rental boat facility here. In here, there was the nursery area for a couple of species of marine fish, halibut and sea bass. And this is a power plant here. And then access to the ocean. So 2 bridges with roads, not a lot of boat traffic. So perhaps this is the perfect location. So when we heard the other talks this morning with all these vertical cliffs and rocks, and here we have sandy bottom, shallow, small, back from the ocean enough that we had some security that it wasn't getting out immediately. Divers from the power plant, actually, a consulting firm working for the power plant, was responsible for maintaining some eelgrass beds up in here because for mitigation for the power plant, putting out hot water and changing the environment. So they found the Caulerpa in 2000. Now here in Huntington Harbor, you can see it's these little ponds. This one isn't even connected to the ocean in any way. And this one's adjacent with a pipe or culvert underneath. and the Caulerpa was in there. And these are just houses along the side. It's very small. I don't know if that's somebody out in the water, but yeah, so a very, very small location, and all of these areas were surveyed and nothing else was found. So when the divers from the consulting firm found the Caulerpa, they started doing the looking for more populations up and down the coast. And at that time, the power company was paying them and couldn't pay for all of that. And so this team was formed. And this is sort of the key to our success, in addition to the fact that it was a perfect place. And we had information from everybody else. But this team got together, and it was agencies as well as some citizens. But primarily the agencies were the Department of Fish and Game, we were called at that time, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the federal agency. And then we have water quality control boards that are responsible for drinking water quality in the state, but they also stay involved in other pollution-related issues. And we had 2 water boards, one for this, the San Diego board, and then another board for the other site. And they're very critical because they have money. So they were on the team and the consulting firm. And there were also Dr. Susan Williams from Bodega Bay, and then Dr. Lars Anderson, who was with the Department of Food, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service. So 2 really prominent scientists. Lars is a prominent weed scientist, aquatic weed scientist, and Susan, is really quite an amazing marine scientist. So we had the scientists on the team, and this is where the battle began at the meeting. The battle was, do we eradicate? Do we study? Can we study while we eradicate? We need more information to provide ourselves and others in case of other infestations. Our department, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, was there for the small infestation in Huntington Harbor. They wanted to bring a big piece of equipment in and just cover it with sand. They thought that would be inexpensive, but the homeowners were not happy. They were afraid of losing their property value, and then the rest of the SCAT agreed, and when the consensus came, they decided to just sort of step through an eradication process. So they continued to map, and they mapped in Agua Hedionda, very transects like Alan was showing, with the rope and the divers. They explored the eradication methods, and then for the rapid response, they started looking for money. And there was some money from the power agency, but then they got money from the water boards. And I think they started out probably with about $3 million, which is a lot of money. And I think wherever Carlos is, that I'm going to say eventually that's where that $7.5 million came from, because that's what we ended up spending. And then later on, we had a science advisory panel. So here are the members of the group, and this is the consulting firm. They worked very hard. They did a great job, but they cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money. They set up some goals, the original SCAT team, and here they are: eradication of the known infestations of Caulerpa taxifolia, prevention and detection of new infestations through outreach and surveillance, and 2 success criteria. They want to contain and kill the Caulerpa, and then determine that it was no longer there. So they did the tarping. Here's the big black tarp. I don't believe they put it down in that large of sheets. They told me 4 meters square. They used rebar and sandbags. It was a flat bottom. It was a sediment bottom. And they started pumping liquid chlorine in there. Probably a year into the project, they changed to the tablets, the chlorine tablets. I think one of the research questions that everybody really wanted answered is what concentration is needed, if any, chlorine? Because there certainly were the people who felt the tarp should do it. And they left them there for a year. They left them there longer. It wasn't this short period of time with your coastline where you have to remove the tarp or the tarp removes itself. They were there a long time. And the treatment sites were just roped off during that time. About 2 years in, so it was 2002, maybe a year and a half in, and they were spending money very fast, looking for more money. And so what we decided to do was convene a symposium along with the science advisory panel. And what we collected the international experts. Alexander was there. Who from Croatia? Yeah. He was there. He was very instrumental in some of our decision-making. Scientists from Australia, a wide variety of scientists. They got the report from Merkel and Associates, what they'd been doing. And the science advisory panel was to help me decide what is our exit strategy? How can we end? Can we end? Because to me, it looked like the consultants could just keep going forever. They saw that money, and I just felt they would. I was kidding the other night; they'd still be going now. But so we had the science advisory panel. It was, I guess, interesting. None of the people who had worked on it, none of those SCAT members, was allowed to be there. Just the international experts reviewing the reports that they had done. And talking about different options and how could we improve and were we being effective. And we came out with some objectives, and the panel wrote the objectives. There was a professional facilitator. And so the panel said, okay, what do we need to, It makes you laugh. So, they wrote the objectives, and this was a one-day panel, analyzed the information, what they'd been given by the consulting firm, look at the characteristics of the infestation sites, determine the viability, I think really of getting rid of it, and then assess the effectiveness of the control, get some monitoring protocols that would work, and make the recommendation to the people paying as to how to really move forward with this. In the end, we probably didn't do many of these, but we got some other good ideas. So the group did look at the treatment efforts and what we were doing with the tarping. We never developed a protocol for new infestations found. I think after today, it has made me think that that's probably something very important to do. We could never get the genus Caulerpa banned. We have worked closely with the pet industry, but we can't really get the quarantine that would be best. We did a lot of education efforts, web page reporting, brochures, and I think we reached a lot of people. Even there are little videos of not dumping your pet so that you don't dump your Caulerpa with it. And there really was no way to institute mandatory reporting, but scientists at California State University Fullerton did genetic work, working with Linda Walters, who was in Florida, to look at the infestations we had and also anything that was being found in the pet stores. So here's how the surveys went. So a 5-year program, not quick like everybody else. They were diving all the time. And they would go then back out with the tarps within 24 hours. This is something that came out of the Science Advisory Panel. Two kind of important things. We weren't sure that they were going to see the Caulerpa, even with all that diving and those transects. So it was, you'll say his name again, Jules from Croatia, who said, well, 2 things. You find some artificial Caulerpa and don't dive if you can't see. Because they were out there diving every day whether they could see or not. And so there was where the money was going. There was just a constant chipping away at all that money through too much, looking too much when they could not see it. And they never, after the initial treatments, they did not find Caulerpa, but they did find the artificial Caulerpa, and so we did know that when the divers went out there, they were in conditions where they could see it if it had been there. Part of the research that was done to make sure we were finished with the projects, and this was also a recommendation, was to take some samples from under the tarps, because the tarps were just there. The agencies, we'd say, okay, when are the tarps going to be removed? And we could never get an answer. So Dr. Anderson cut some holes in the tarps, and he, so that they could see whether or not there was regrowth after the initial treatment. Additionally, there were cores taken back to the lab to see if there was regrowth. And even with the chlorine, the native eelgrass and the invertebrates did come back from the core samples, but the Caulerpa did not. So that was good information to have, and it helped us realize we could take the tarps off. So back to what the criteria were. Containment and lethal treatment. So we did find that the treatment was lethal at both sites. The lab assessment found no regrowth in the cores, and the holes found no surviving Caulerpa. So the first criteria was met. And then the second criteria was to verify the absence of Caulerpa. They continued to survey for over 3 years. There was no live Caulerpa found for 3 years after the tarps were taken off. And so we decided we could then say that the infestation was gone. Because the consulting firm is still out there, they're still out there working with the power plant, they're still looking at the major site, and they haven't found anything. So here's the cost. And here's the $7.7 million. And the power plants gave us startup money, and the National Marine Fisheries Service provided a good portion, but most came from cleanup and abatement funding that is given to the Water Quality Control Board. They sort of called this a biological pollutant, and we're able to use the money for that. Money that was provided by my agency went into the research projects and into the symposium so that we could try to figure out how to move forward. But, I mean, this, at 8%, that seems like a lot of meetings, doesn't it? So 8% of $7.7 million. Yeah, a lot of meetings. And the treatment and surveillance obviously being the big portion, and then further coastal surveillance to look at other potential sites. And 4% on outreach, but that still is a lot of money. So these are the things that I kind of learned, and I feel that we all should have learned from it. First, we were lucky, and we could recognize there was a threat once it was found. The response team, that Southern California Caulerpa Action Team, they met, they talked, they found a direction. They came to the agencies, we found money. And I think that was something from yesterday's discussion that made me think about how do the science and the management, and how do people talk, and how can you find funding? And I thought, well, some of this came from trust. We knew each other from being in other groups together. We trusted what the other person said. The science advisory panel came. They were well-respected scientists. They argued. We decided, but we had to trust each other that we could actually eradicate, and the circumstances were such that we could. Immediate field response was important, and to do it again, this is what I would do differently, is the minute a collaborative group of agencies, stakeholders, landowners, the minute they get together is the minute you need to bring the scientists in, and more scientists than we had, because the scientists we had were very good, but their voices weren't heard. And there were things we could have done a lot better. We could have more information now on different eradication techniques, had there just been some, I think, some minor modifications. So if we had another large-scale infestation, and we did with the Dreissenids, that's the first thing that we did, is we organized a scientific advisory panel to figure out what direction we could go. These are a few of the other things we work on. I spend my whole life on quagga mussel prevention. And you all are familiar with everything that's on this slide, but I spend every day working on this, and our program is really to avoid this coming into our state. We have an infestation, so here's the US map. They've been here forever, and then in 2007, they came into the West, the quagga mussel. And the Colorado River's right here. So we have 26 infestations just from water supply. So not boat traffic. So the boat came from here to wherever, Lake Mead, came from here to here. Then the mussels came down the river, but now it's all through our water supply system. There's a tremendous amount of money being spent by the water agencies to keep the drinking water flowing. So our job is to make sure that it doesn't come up here. These yellow stars are places where we've detected boats with mussels on them. Here we have a small zebra mussel infestation that did not come from here, a separate infestation where we've closed the lake. But yeah, so we find our job is to provide the tools to keep the mussels from coming out of there. And we do want to keep further introductions into the state, prevent them, keep them at the currently infested waters. Hopefully we will come up with, Greg called it the magic weapon, magic bullet. There is a biocontrol being worked on. It's a Pseudomonas, a soil bacteria that a biotech firm thinks might be useful. I'm not certain I agree, but I think we'll see how they do with that. They're doing some test sites. And we established new laws and regulations. We work a lot with the local agencies because the local agencies have to do all the boat inspections. We've standardized monitoring protocols for them, and also we constantly provide them with training on how to inspect boats, how to decontaminate boats, how to look for the mussels, because we know we can't do it ourselves. And there's a lot of artificial substrate out there. We have a lab that we let them send plankton samples to so that they can find out if there are the larval veligers. But we can't do the work, so we have to have the local agencies do it for us. Here's another one of the species that we would like to manage, but we know that we're never going to eradicate. And so actually, Shayla Zabin, who works with Greg, has been the lead on this project in San Francisco Bay, working on the docks, trying to educate people, trying to remove some of the kelp. My agency did a removal, one of our dive classes out at Santa Catalina Island. It's an offshore island. They took out tons of Undaria, but that didn't get rid of it. So this is probably a problem we're not going to resolve, although they have, so here's the project and what we're doing. They have been able to remove it from Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. This is one of the divers there. And so it's sort of that same theory of keeping out of your natural area, of your protected area, keeping your invasive species out if you're not going to be able to control the whole population. The other species we've worked on a lot over the years is the Chinese mitten crab. I know you're all familiar with this too. By 1998, there were thousands and thousands of crabs in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And that is our water source for Southern California, one of our main water sources. And they would take thousands of crabs off of the racks, where the fish racks, the trash racks that go down into the Southern California. And now you can't find one. Oops, wrong button. So these were the impacts we were concerned with. We continue to do our monitoring, but as I said, we cannot, for the last 2 years, we have not been able to find a crab. So, this, just the boom and bust, or maybe we're rid of them, but there's a constant interest in commercializing them in California for seafood restaurants. So we haven't ever accepted that as a possibility, and luckily now there aren't enough. There's legislation this session, even though there are no crabs, that somebody's introducing some legislation. Spartina, somebody mentioned earlier today. So we had or may have a native Spartina, but introduced Spartina came in intentionally for restoration in San Francisco Bay. This is a large project. Certainly with the Spartina, it changes the habitat so much from a habitat perspective for birds. And so there's the big project to get rid of it. And I think I have the numbers up here. This has been a $25 million control project. So 10 years, it should be over in 2015. Right now, there are only 39 acres remaining. It's the last, hardest 39 acres of this very large project. But it has become a coastal project, states of Washington, Oregon, and California working together to fix the Spartina problem. So, this is another project funded by the Coastal Conservancy, and actually it was sort of when former Governor Schwarzenegger was looking for a project for oceans, this was the project he agreed to. So really, finally, these are just my thoughts, as I've worked on this for several years, that everyone knows prevention's the key. We have to find ways to limit the vectors, limit the pathways, stop things before they come, and really prevention through vector management. And for the ocean system, we recently have been working on vector risk assessments. I think Greg's group did 2 of them, and looking at the recreational boater pathway, commercial fishing pathway, live seafood, the aquaculture industry, marine aquaculture industry, and live bait, and there's another one I never remember, to look at those vectors to prevent the spread. And then forming the team always to blame the other person. So really, we need to have other people to share the responsibility, come up with the money, come up with the ideas, and form the strategies that we need, and academia at all stages to really give us a check of, is there new research? What aren't we seeing? What don't we know? Because I think as an agency scientist, there's a lot we don't know, and we need to have the information if we're going to talk to the politicians and the people who actually can help us more with money and with regulations. Fund research when necessary. And then regulations, I've talked to a couple people during coffee, regulations, we can write them, but if we can't enforce them, then we just spent a lot of time writing something. It's very difficult to enforce things. Enforcement personnel cost a lot of money. When they can, they do a good job, but often they don't have the tools to do that. And this is something I think we all need to, everybody, scientists and managers always need to think outside the box. How do you find money for what you need to do? And then with our partners, how do we get them involved? How do we get the boaters to always clean their boats? How do we get the aquarium owners to not dump their tanks, and how do we change those behaviors? So I think that is all I have. I just want to say we had $7 million for Caulerpa, but I don't have enough money for business cards. So we changed our name in January. And we can't order new business cards, so it's funny. It just tells you how times change from 2000 or 2002 to 2012. It's changed for everyone. Things just aren't accessible. And some people to thank Rachel Woodfield. The Caulerpa slides were hers. Susan Williams, who I think was originally asked to come speak here, and asked me to come. These are people from my department who work in the invasive species program, and Bill Pasnokas was our person on the SCAT, members of Coastal Conservancy, and then Dr. Anderson, who helped with a lot of information. So thank you.